At what moment did you realize you married the wrong person? Story 1. When my best friend died suddenly at a young age, leaving 3 children behind, and my now ex-wife didn't want to be around me because I was very depressed. She suggested polyamory as a way to save our marriage. Yeah, I was out. Story 2. A woman I was dating told me she divorced her husband because after his father died in his arms, he was very depressed, and she didn't want to be around depressed people. Imagine your father died, and a few months later your wife leaves you because you have not recovered from that. Story 3. Engaged, not quite married yet. When I had been on mandatory bed rest and caring for our infant son, after having emergency surgery for nearly bleeding to death after a miscarriage, and he came home from work and looked me dead in the face and said, "Why aren't the fucking dishes done?" Called my mom the next morning and told her I was leaving, hightailed it out of there 2 weeks later. Story 4. On my wedding day, when my granddad and uncle told me that I didn't have to marry my ex-husband and they'd drive me home, and to not worry about being embarrassed or the money. They'd explain everything to the guests, and I wouldn't have to do anything. Edit. We did get married and we divorced later. Sorry, my OP was unclear. Story 5. I made a small ring holder in wood working when I was 14. My teacher looked at it and said, "Wow, you should keep that and give that to your wife." And I thought that was a good idea and considered it romantic. It was admittedly a simple piece, but it all came together quite well and looked elegant. I looked after it for 15 years and gave it to her on our wedding night, along with the backstory of why it was special. She looked at me and said, "Why would I want this? I already have one." Story 6. She was unemployed, I was working full-time. No children, just a couple of cats that mostly I took care of, since she didn't want to handle cat poop. This was the situation for a few years. We did our best to split chores, but we had a housekeeper twice a week, so it wasn't a lot of chores split between us. One day she said, "Hey, can you clean the living room before you go to work? I need to be at home all day and I prefer if it's clean." I just snapped mentally and felt like I'm being taken advantage of. Little edit. My wife was unemployed due to unfortunate string of illness. She wasn't lazy, and cleaning was hard for her. It sucks, but life sometimes isn't what we want it to be. Story 7. He was always manipulative and emotionally abusive, the slow kind that takes years to cultivate and ramped up during COVID lockdowns. Then there was a switch one night. He actually knocked me out the first blow, so I had no recollection but looked like I got ran over or something. He said I had fallen in the shower. The bruising and cuts were not adding up to that kind of injury. I remember laying awake the next night in bed the entire night worried he might roll over and choke me or something. That was it. It would never be the same and there was no saving it at that point. I pieced together pieces and eventually got mostly the truth out from him. But yeah, I was so tolerant. He talked about changing so much. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. After the violence, there was no way I could carry on. It was over. Story 8. Don't like to think of a person I once loved as wrong. We grew apart. She led a frivolous lifestyle that I enabled, and it went hand in hand with my, back then, self-sacrificing nature. I worked long hours to provide after having discussions with her to maybe be more mindful about spending, especially since she didn't work, neither at home nor outside. That includes childcare. I did almost all of it from the beginning. But alas, love can blind one, especially someone with an affection-starved upbringing. She cheated on multiple occasions while our son was in daycare while I was at work in our bed, which fucked me up additionally. We sat down on an especially harsh day for me, working for a good 16 hours. I came home and put our son to bed after I prepared dinner for us. She told me she found someone who appreciates her and spends time with her, and that I am an awful husband. I moved into a smaller place with my son. She lives with that guy now. It broke me very much, but I am better now. Story 9. I didn't learn it until my husband of 11 years divorced me. All the signs were there. Infidelity, not giving me respect. Yet, out of financial fear of getting a divorce with no love towards him, I stayed. My fears I held on to washed away with every misstep I took in being a single woman. I had to learn how to put me first. It wasn't always easy. For every misstep I took, I learned from it and only grew more independent. Oddly enough, I met my second husband, Tom, exactly 11 years later. I dated occasionally, but nothing that took up all of my time. I loved the solitude of being in my place all by myself, to stop and learn about who I am in my core. We were married from 2004 to 2012 until we found out he had colon cancer in 2007. For the next years, and up to his death, he was on a different cocktail of chemo, only being in remission for 6 months. I met my soulmate who showed me unconditional love until he took his last breath, and I took care of him unconditionally. How lucky am I? Story 10. I made excuses for her shortcomings, ignoring the red flags that existed. I got engaged because my friends were getting engaged, and I had my doubts even then. Once we were married, I realized that it wasn't just a different way of dating, it was more permanent. Those red flags that existed before were now part of our lives, and then she cheated on me. We didn't divorce then. I tried to salvage everything and she tried to make amends, but what we had was destroyed. And every day, I think about my life without her. I love her, but I am no longer in love with her. I'm in the beginning stages of looking at divorce, and it has me feeling all sorts of things. But I want to be happy, not content. Story 11. I got injured on a rafting trip down the Grand Canyon. She just took off and did her thing while everyone else made sure I got food, etc. At the end of the trip, I told her we were splitting. She blurted out in a moment of honesty, "But I just got used to you." I realized she really didn't love me all that time. Story 12. About 20 years ago, I was flying home to New Zealand from England, which required a change of planes in Hong Kong, then getting a connecting domestic flight from Auckland to the city I live in. Got to Hong Kong and discovered that because of an issue with the plane, the departure would be delayed. This meant I would miss my connecting domestic flight and end up home about 4 hours later than expected. I phoned my now ex-wife from HK to let her know, and she went ballistic at me because I wouldn't be able to pick our daughter up from daycare, and she would miss drinks after work with her friends. Story 13. My wife, licensed counselor, suggested I see a therapist. I shared every detail of my therapy sessions. She accused me of lying to her about my sessions. For context, the first 2 therapists I described how during my morning commute to work, I had an unhealthy urge to swing into oncoming lanes of traffic. Without ever hearing a word about my wife, they immediately jumped to suggest that my wife/marriage was the source of my depression. I would then become very angry and shout, loud enough for the patients waiting to hear, at the therapists on my way out of their office. My wife was adamant that I must have said something about her to spark their response. I legitimately never brought her up in those sessions. Analyzing our relationship further, the first red flag that I ignored was after a game night with my parents. We were living together, but not married yet, and during the drive home, she burst into tears because she didn't get a chance to read any of the cards that were pulled for our team. The whole evening we were all laughing and seemed to be having a good time. I guess she is just very good at pretending. Story 14. I knew very early on in the first 2 of my 3 marriages. The third one has been going strong for over 10 years now. I won't go into details, but will recommend for anyone wanting to get married for the first time. Take a day and go downtown and spend a day sitting in divorce court. Listen to what these people are saying. And remember, they all thought they were madly in love long before they ended up in that courtroom. Story 15. Before we got married, I broke up with her. A month later, she contacted me saying she's pregnant. Our families were conservative, but I knew deep down inside this wasn't gonna work. And yes, the baby is mine. 100% she has my birthmark and very obvious features. Reason I broke up with her was because she was incredibly childish and immature. Didn't like what I said. "I'm breaking up with you! Oh, wait, I didn't mean it! Text me, call me, I'm sorry!" Or if she did something wrong, she wouldn't admit to it. Or she would give me the silent treatment and get upset when I didn't engage. Overall, very immature person emotionally. Of course, with the baby, all these issues amplified. She started raising her voice and blaming me for everything. I took 2 months parental leave, and before you go on typical Reddit fashion why I didn't take more, it's because in Canada they only pay 55% of your base salary, so we couldn't both live with only 55% of our income. I also used all my year's worth of vacation to add a total of 3 months, where I was home taking care of the baby equally. I never missed a single appointment. I was there for the first day of daycare, family events, everything. I'm a decent cook, and I cook in bulk for the week with different foods. I also helped cleaning even all this while I went back to work full time. Well, her attitude kept going, and no matter how cut she said she would change, she never did. She started not only getting upset at me for things that weren't my fault, but telling on me to her family. So now it wasn't just her unreasonably upset giving me the silent treatment. And no, this wasn't PPD because she was behaving like this before the baby. I initiated the divorce, and a year and a half later and $60K down the drain in lawyers and courts, I won 50-50. She fought foot and nail to literally erase me from our child's life, and the judges would not take me seriously. She told everyone I was a deadbeat and never did anything. I had ample proof to prove her otherwise in court, Nevertheless, there were friends and her family sided with her despite the false allegations, but EF them. Story 16. Long story, but in my first marriage, I was working 2 jobs, 60, 80 hours a week total, and paying for childcare for our 3 children while she went to school full-time. We had agreed that after she finished her associate's degree, paralegal, the roles would reverse and I would go back to school. Towards the end of her degree, she started hinting that she didn't want me to stop working and that she wanted to finish her bachelor's and eventually go to school to become a lawyer. That was kind of the point where I knew things weren't working, but I shrugged it off and said we'll stick to what we agreed upon. She was about 6 months from finishing her associate's degree when I found out I was deploying in 15 months. I told her we could set a budget to save a good portion of the money, and when I got back from deployment I could start school. That would give her time to finish her bachelor's degree. She basically pressed and said that if I was going to let her finish her bachelor's, I might as well keep working while she finished her law degree, 4 more years. I told her our original agreement was her associate's. I was allowing it to change to be bachelor's because of my deployment, but that she needed to honor her side. That's when things fell apart. With a smirk on her face, her exact words were, "I can get more money from child support than you are wanting to give me for our monthly budget." She filed for immediate separation, but still lived in the house I paid for. I tried to make it work for my kids, but she was stringing it along because I was handling all of the bills and all of the childcare when I wasn't working. We filed for divorce around Christmas, after I saw some texts with another man when she was supposed to be working on our marriage. She moved in with a female friend of hers from class. Divorce was granted about 3 months later, thanks to the length of the legal separation. After we filed, she stopped taking care of the kids entirely and started dating a few different guys from her classes. In the 9 months before the deployment, she saw the kids maybe 4 weeks in total. She came around with her new boyfriends each time she came to pick up the kids. One time she was stumbling, drunk and high, and looking like she just came off a 3-day bender. She was bragging about how she had moved in with her new fiancé. I didn't let her take the kids, and she hit me. I said I would call the cops if she didn't leave. She said if I called the cops, she would her herself and tell them I did it, and that her new man would back her up. I still didn't let her take the kids, and she eventually left. Every time after that, which was rare, I made sure my brother was with me when she would pick the kids up. The friend had let her move in because she genuinely felt bad for my ex. But my ex was spending all of the child support I was giving her on going out and partying while I had the kids. She had also flunked out of her last semester of college. The friend began to put the pieces together and realized she needed to confront my ex. When she did, my ex blew up at her and showed her true colors. So the friend kicked my ex out. Her friend got a hold of me later that week through FB Messenger to meet up and talk. We met up and she told me everything. Basically, my ex had been running around telling everyone that I was physically and mentally abusive and controlling, that we were separated from the beginning of her going back to school. From the moment she started back to school, she was sleeping around with several different dudes and a bunch of other bombs. About 2 weeks later, my ex-wife tried to seduce her friend's fiancé and then accused him of trying to rape her. I stopped following the drama after that. When I deployed, she got the kids, as I had no legal authority over them due to the laws in place surrounding that issue. 3 days after I flew out, she dropped them at her parents' house and then went on to party for another year. This was all 13 years ago. There were a lot more issues and accusations from her end over the next several years, but I wound up with primary custody of our kids for the past 9 years because she had been caught by the courts in too many lies. She has every other weekend with them available, but gets the about once a month. Story 17. I changed careers in part because I wanted to be a better provider. I cared deeply for my wife and wanted to give her a better life. When that career change failed, I struggled. After 6 months of struggling, she had enough and asked for a separation. After a couple of months, I got my life back together, found a new career, and realized that she had been holding me back the whole time. I was so busy taking care of her that I couldn't ever work on myself. And then it hit me. I was better off without her. Story 18, when I became friends with someone who was going through a divorce. This friend told me she always felt like she had to make herself really small, like she was constantly walking on eggshells and was never safe to be herself. Constant gaslighting and stuff too. He was not emotionally available, would never get angry or yell. It was more that she always felt like she was doing something wrong. She was constantly on edge and stressed out. And I realized that is exactly how I felt in my marriage too, but that I never gave myself permission to admit it. I am still married to mine though, scared to not see my kids every day, and I don't have the courage to advocate for myself. My friend did end up getting her divorce. We don't talk anymore, but I see her stuff pop up on Instagram from time to time, and she appears to be doing great. Story 19. Less than 4 weeks after we married, he said, "I don't like calling you my wife. It sounds so old. I much prefer girlfriend." Add to that the day before the wedding, me and the bridesmaids had to do 100% of the venue set up ourselves. Reason? Because it was an unusually brilliant sunny day, and he needed to sunbathe so he could get a nice tan for the photos. I knew it was over at that point, yet we still limped on for another 18 months. And that also cost me a job at the European Parliament. Folks, trust your gut. Don't waste your life in hope. Story 20. I don't know when I realized. I probably always knew it wasn't a good idea, but he reminds me every day. Today I cried because I'm really at my wit's end with our problems, and instead of showing empathy or compassion, he got angry with me. But angry in this kind of way where he smiles and laughs in this really cruel way. It's hard to describe, but it makes me hate him. Story 21. I don't understand how there are just such bad people in the world reading this thread. I've always thought when you married someone, you agree to share the load between each other as much as possible, especially when it comes to kids. It's seriously disgusting how some people are. If someone is cheating, why can't they just go to their partner and tell them and get a proper divorce instead of going behind their back? There are things that I'm unhappy about, sure, no marriage is perfect. But I point out to my wife when things are too much in her favor and not in mine and vice versa. We talk about that as adults and try to work on them. Although there are some disagreements we have, it's never been anything like here where I'm seeing people after inheritance or only concerned about petty things. It's insane, and I'm sad for all those that were treated like trash on here.